questions and for Rachel to be as thorough as I know she is going to be. I'd like to get started. Um, I wanted to just kick off this webinar with a definition about what a community of practice is. I think it is a term, a practice. It's certainly something that we've all been hearing and doing, but I don't know that any of that I have spent enough time really kind of understanding what it means. So I just want to say a community of practice is a group of people who share a concern or passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So this webinar is the first of Utah's Employment First Community of Practice series. We're doing a combination of webinars and in-person training that range from engaging families to having a more person-centered and person-driven approach, engaging employers in a more individualized way, and then finally building supported sustainable employment programs. So there's this series that all of the announcements came out together, and this is the first one. And I'm so glad that Rachel was able to provide this training for us. I've had the opportunity to work with Rachel through the ODEP work in a different capacity, but I don't know that many folks in Utah have had the opportunity to work with her. Rachel has incredible experience as the Senior Program Advisor for JobPath, Inc., a nonprofit agency in New York City. They focus on providing competitive integrated employment and a range of individualized and day and residential support for people with developmental disabilities, including folks that have autism and a dual diagnosis. She has extensive experience through her work as the Chief Operating Officer for JobPath to implement customized employment and day services. She has been able to use various funding streams to develop quality programs. She was instrumental in the development of a consortium for customized employment and a coalition of agencies and employers in New York City working together to share training, resources, and employment opportunities. Rachel has been an expert for the Office of Disability Employment Policy and part of the EFSLMP work. She was instrumental in the provider transformation work. She's provided consultation on the service descriptions and work that we've been doing here in Utah. She's also done work as a facilitator with NCORE and the AFSLMP provider transformation work. She also happens to have a law degree from the New York University School of Law and is the parent of a young man with autism. Rachel, if there's anything you would like to add, I kind of condensed your bio, and I did include it in the invite if you want to read more thoroughly. We're thrilled to have you share your insights and experience as we think about how to engage families in more integrated services. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tricia. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm particularly happy to talk about this subject because it's something that's dear to my heart. That was a great introduction, and I think you gave a good overview of my experience. One of the things I wanted to highlight is that although I've spent my years at JobPath doing lots of funding work and program development, key to my role as Chief Operating Officer, because I was Chief Operating Officer early on, key to my role there has always been, because we're a small agency, working really closely with families and individuals that we support. Partly as part of our employment program, working with any concerns they have within the employment program, but also with our day program and our residential program, as we've encouraged people to become more involved in their community and definitely more involved in employment. So I've always thought of my role as being there for individuals and families, and even now I'm sort of in a different role at JobPath and actually living in Vermont now. And one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is talking with families. It's a delight to talk with them, but also I think I have a particular perspective on it because I am a family member as well. So I'm really happy to be here. I just want to kind of go over some of our objectives. I wanted to first just mirror what Trish said about community of practice. This is an opportunity for us to share information. I certainly have information and perspective to share with you, but we want to leave time at the end to get not only questions, but your own experiences and ideas, because you are going to be the guest, a really good guide for each other in all of this work, starting with the family engagement, but all of the subjects that we're going to talk about. I think you'll see also as we talk about um, engaging families and individuals and other stakeholders, it's so connected to the other subjects that Trish talked about, person-centered planning and good employment practices. So I think this is a good, I think the discussion we have here is a good launching off point for talking about all of the subjects that you're going to work together on. So in terms of objectives, what I would like to start with is talking about understanding the worldview of parents of adult children with disabilities, as well as the concerns and goals and dreams of the individuals we support. The reason I think this is so important is because we can't really think about how to address people's concerns and their dreams unless we really understand them. And I think too often when we come up against obstacles of families who express concern, we go immediately to a conclusion. They're not interested in employment. They want things to stay the same. It's much more complicated than that, because of course we're dealing with complex people and a whole background. And I think it's important, if we're going to succeed in addressing people's concerns and help them over the hump, we need to understand it. So we're going to spend some time doing that. And then we're going to move into talking about how to present employment in particular, but also community-based services and support in particular. And not only how to present the positive, but the basic information we need to know and we need to present to help people understand what we're doing. Then finally, that all comes together into thinking about a general strategy for communicating with individuals and families. And that's going to be sort of strewn into all of what I talk about. So having talked about the objectives, I wanted to start, because I am a parent of a young man with autism. I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience, help describe a little bit the world that forms us as parents of special needs children or adult children, describing the experience a little bit, and also the transition that was required for me and for other people as we contemplate employment and more independence in the community. So I have a picture here of my son Alex, and he's sitting in an office in one of his two jobs, and that's a really successful outcome for him. That doesn't mean it comes without its challenges, because it does. Not every day, but every few months there may be something that comes up that we're all working on with him. On the other side, I have some pictures that represent the world that he came from. And I think it's important, particularly to think about that in terms of someone like me who has worked for years at a place like Job Path, has always thought about Alex being in the community. But that wasn't how his life started out, even during the time that I was at Job Path, because as a parent, I was very, very focused on giving him the protection that he needed. So regardless of all of my goals for him long term, he was in a segregated school to make sure that he wasn't bullied, that he got a lot of attention. He was picked up by a school bus. I spent years finding the right therapist for him within our resources. When he was going to get bar mitzvahed, I didn't have him go to regular Hebrew school, because regular Hebrew schools are known for people just being mean to each other, and I knew that. So he had this very segregated life, and I had the advantages in contemplating that transition. One, all that transition support for him was done by an agency that I worked with, so I trusted them. Alex had a period of time in between high school and employment, where he was in a college-based support program that Job Path also helped support, where he got an opportunity to try out being in the community in an environment that was somewhat protected. And so I also had my experience at Job Path to help me. But when we think about parents generally, understanding that transition and that role that they've had for many years is really important in thinking about how we need to approach them. So here are some issues and sort of some things about the role that I think is important to think about. So one is parents of special needs children spend years advocating for educational adult services. Every year when their child goes into a new classroom, they're spending time explaining to that teacher what they need to know. They've been responsible for making sure everything's in place. And they get used to being the major decision maker in a child's life. As a result of all this, there's a couple of things that end up forming us as parents. One, the time our young adult is in a program, an adult program, we are exhausted and we're ready for not to have to keep making those decisions. Doesn't mean we're not willing to do it, but we really, one of the reasons people are so happy to have their regular, a facility-based program or a regular adult program that has a lot of structure, is that finally maybe they don't have to do that. We have to understand that kind of exhaustion factor. We also have to understand, because parents think of themselves and have been an important major decision maker in creating success and security for their child, they trust themselves. This is what they've chosen. They've chosen something that they think is good in many cases, and they don't want to lose that. And they have a lot of confidence in their own judgment for good reason for many of them, because they've worked hard to get where they are. So I think understanding that this is not just we like things the way they are, but the people have worked hard to create that, and that also they're afraid of losing the new freedom that they have now that their adult child has been settled into a program. Knowing that mindset is, I think, very important. Final thing is that as parents, and we all as parents worry a lot, whether we have a child with special needs, a child with special needs, young child with special needs, or a child with no special needs in particular, but just the needs that all children and young adult children have. And when we worry, that encourages us to focus on challenges. And there's a saying that we're all as happy as our least happy child. I think it's important to keep in mind that people worry about our children, and we know that, but it does bear repeating. So as we're going from that role, thinking about what the particular concerns that families have, and then we'll talk after this about the concerns of individuals, just kind of going through a little bit what those concerns are. And many of you know that, but I think it bears thinking about in a little bit more detail. So first, people are concerned about adequate support and services. And that is a very robust concern, because we do spend our lives thinking about how to create a really stimulating world with friends, with things to do. The biggest concern of any parent with a young adult with autism or with a developmental intellectual disability is that they're not just doing nothing, that there isn't a void. And so there's a concern of, what if they lose a job? Will there be something for them to do? What if that volunteer job disappears, opportunity disappears? Will they be occupied? That's one important concern. Another important concern is the oversight. For many of the people that we support who have significant disabilities, they may not be getting a full-time job. And from a benefit point of view, some of them may not want to get a full-time job. And then the question is, what are they going to do the rest of the time? And that is a real concern of families, and we need to think about that and be prepared to talk about it. Individual and family finances, we know, are very intertwined. It's not just the income, but it's the control of the income. Families in all across our country are struggling We have two parents working in many cases. And if there is a parent who's also a caretaker, that benefits are very important in running that household. And control of those benefits we know are very important. We'll talk more about that. And then, of course, there are travel and safety concerns, which we all hear about all the time for good reason. Other concerns that are a little bit less concrete, but really, really important, are the feeling about how the outside world is going to treat people. And I want to tell a story about a visit I made to a provider in Pennsylvania. And part of when we do provider transformation work, we like to talk not only to we talk to families, we talk to staff on all levels, and we also try to talk to at least one board member. And in this case, with this provider, the board member was also happened to be a parent of a young man who was served by the agency. And when we spoke about the commitment to competitive integrated employment from a board point of view, he was completely aligned with the vision that this agency had of of employment first. And then we talked about his son. And he said, "Oh, well, no, not my son. He would not well in a community environment. He needs to be in a very protected environment." And that was really interesting. And that's because his primary concern for many years has been protecting his child. And he talked about all the behaviors that would affect his son's ability to see kindness in the outside world and to fit in. And so that is a major concern, even for people who believe in competitive integrated employment. One of the things that parents of young people with special needs, children with special needs, always joke about is the fact that we're always waiting for that phone call. And I think as providers, we know that when we get on the phone to talk to a family, the first thing we always say is everything's all right, everything's all right. And it's a signal to us that people are very concerned about failure, about something going wrong. And so we should keep that in mind. In terms of the individuals we support, they, of course, have their own sets of concerns and confusion about employment and spending more time in the community. And, a lot of it is, the reason I have this picture here is it's a picture of a workshop, but it shows it shows that there is an environment that people have been in for many years. And as a result of that, they're used to it and they're comfortable with it. So before that, I want to talk about the fact that first, all the people that we support are very tied in with their families, and they're going to reflect all of the concerns that we talked about. Because they care about their families and they respect their parents. They may sometimes fight with their parents, but they respect their parents. And that's one of the most heartwarming things that I find in working in this field is that connection between individuals and families, even when there's tension. And so they do reflect those concerns. But they have their own particular concerns as well. And one of that is friendship. And friendship and peers, and that's extremely important to the people we support. One young man that we were working with in Michigan, when they started talking with him about employment, he knew that the workshop was going to close down, and he knew it was going to close down in about 6 months. And he basically said, when they started talking to him about employment, I want to spend the time now with my friends. And in situations like that, where people are holding on tightly to what they're afraid to lose, we need to be talking to them not about next step as a separate issue, as a separate new thing. We need to tie it in to their friendship. We need to be having that person explore in the community with his friends. So they think of this as a program, still a part of a program that involves their friends. We need to think about how they're going to maintain those friendships. This is something that's very, very important to them. The second thing is the familiarity. And one of the people gain confidence from what they know how to do, and they treasure that. Another man in another facility in Michigan was the linchpin of all the work in that workshop, and he is. And when the manager of the workshop has a great deal of confidence in him, has talked to him about working. He says yes because he respects the manager. And then when the community employment folks talk to him, he doesn't, he says no. And that's because he has no vision of what it's going to look like. All he knows is that it's really working for him now. It's comfortable, he's successful, he has a lack of confidence in any other area of employment. And so he needs to be able to have a more concrete vision. The final group of people I want to talk about before we sort of address how we're going to talk to people about this transition is case managers. And as we're working with individuals and families, the case managers, whether they're called care managers, whether they're called service coordinators, they're really important as a part of this process. And if we don't bring them into the process, then we may find that they are an obstacle when they don't need to be an obstacle. And one of the things I have a lot of respect for the service managers in our system. We have some really good ones. We have some who have less knowledge, but they do believe that their job is to be responsive to people's expressed interests and needs. And so if we're starting with an individual family who's reluctant, we're going to get that reflected in the case managers. And so if we don't bring the case managers into the work we're doing with families and let them understand, as well as the families, what employment will really look like, what community-based services will look like, then we're losing a potential advocate, and we're not understanding that dynamic between them, the case managers and the family. We also know that because employment has not been a primary service for many years and is just beginning to become a more primary service, that there's a lack of knowledge among case managers. And so we've got to kind of help fill that gap. And then the last thing I want to say is that everybody in our systems are working really, really hard. And case managers have large caseloads and a lot of things to attend to. So we've got to make the time and help them make the time to learn more about what our goals are. So the answer to navigating all of this, and hopefully I didn't overwhelm everybody with all of the issues that we need to deal with, is that, because we have so much to do in so little time, and because it takes energy to address people's concerns, and because we also are all comfortable in the way things have already been working, so important to really step back and create a strategy. And in every situation where I've dealt with a provider agency that is saying, oh, we can't get people interested in employment, what's happening really is that lower entry-level staff who are trying to do employment are making efforts. They don't have a good strategy for talking to families. They don't have enough knowledge. They're getting a no. They're trying again. They're getting several no's, but they don't have a framework for working in it. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to keep getting no's even if we do everything right, because we are going to have, people who have very strong opinions about it, and we can't control people, but we can do the best we can to make information available that will help people really understand what this new world looks like. What I just wanted to provide quickly here is a little rubric for thinking about stakeholder engagement generally, and where we're going with this discussion. This is a little process, a graphic that Pat Rogan from the University of Indiana School of Education together in our provider transformation manual 2.0, which I will give you a link to later. It just shows that it is a process. It's not a linear process. It's kind of a circular process. We need to think about the needs, which is what we've been doing, the needs and the interests. Then we need to think about what expectations are and come up with an action plan. And that's what we're talking about here, is coming up with the action plan, understanding people's expectations and creating a strategy from that. And then we may have to go back. We may have to keep circling back because it takes time. It takes time, not only our time, but it takes a period of time for people to understand. So getting down to sort of creating that action plan, a lot of this has to do with preparation. And so we want to prepare with knowledge of the individual, with the supports and services that are available, and knowing how to describe that for people. We want to think about whether we need to create a basic template for staff, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. Then start with informal discussions outside of the formal planning meeting. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, well, we brought it up at the planning meeting and they said no, and the care manager didn't really think it was a good idea and they were ready for it, and so that's done. We really want to have those informal discussions with both the care manager and the individual and the family over a period of time before it becomes a formal discussion. And a lot of that is starting with painting a positive picture of employment and how it fits into people's lives. In terms of the template, it's really interesting because sometimes you'll need it and sometimes you won't need it. When we were working with one agency, we came up with an action plan, and part of the action plan is that we were going to create a protocol for working with families, and that was one of the primary needs that agency identified. I was going to provide technical assistance. And when I came back and said, well, how are we doing with this? What shall we start working on creating that template? The employment manager said to me, I went back and I talked to some benefits counselors that we had available. I made sure I understood, and now I'm doing it and I'm fine. And I'm getting families really interested and we're moving forward. Sometimes knowing that you have to take some action and learn more is enough. Sometimes, though, staff needs more support, and putting together an actual template for how to work with families will be helpful. In creating that positive image of employment and community-based support, we really want to describe what it will look like. We don't want to just talk about, are you interested in employment? We really want to explain to them how it will look like, what other supports and services are available, and we'll talk about that more later. Really, and talk to people about what it will look like in their particular life, not what it looks like in the abstract. The conversations we have need to give people enough time to express their concerns and a lot of time to listen. And we know in our field with person-centered planning, when we get deeper into what's really good person-centered planning, it always involves listening. We want to create ongoing discussions. And the last thing I wanted to really, really emphasize here is that it's so important to involve senior leadership. And if you're not in senior leadership and your senior leadership isn't involved in having these discussions and you need their support, ask for it. If you're in senior leadership, suggest that you get involved in providing that support. Families really trust senior leadership. That goes back to all the involvement that families have in for many years in making sure that they get the right services and selecting the right place. They will trust the senior leadership, and it's a mistake not to bring them into it. So this is very, very quickly, this is a slide that talks about expressing a positive mission, and it's was put together by Jenny Sasnet and Tom Wilds, who worked at in transforming St. John's, which was a facility-based service in the DC area and is now completely community-based. And they always emphasize, don't go in and say the government's going to close down the facility or workshop. It's much better to be positive about what you're doing and doing it as in a way that shows continuity. We're going to get better at doing what we're already doing. We're going to continue to help people find community connected to what people care about. And I think that is a really important message. The other thing that we always really suggest people do is to communicate excitement and vision and to provide stories. And the stories need to be very specific to the people that we're talking to. So, I have a couple of photos here of people who have very different needs. If you're going to have a story about employment for somebody and you're talking to somebody who has significant physical needs and transportation needs, you want to have a story that they can relate to. If you're talking with somebody who's got a lot of competencies, you want to have a story that relates a lot of competencies physically and intellectually. You want to talk about employment that way. You want to create excitement, but it should be specific. And some of us who are starting with employment may not have those stories. And so you want to look for those stories. And there are many, many stories on the internet. And the whole EFS-LMP community has, videos and stories. People will help you. They want you to succeed in working with people in employment. Find those stories if you don't have your own. And then use those stories to transition into creating a concrete picture for people of what it will look like for them. Again, it's not abstract. It's start talking to people about their interests and potential. And it doesn't have to be only related to employment, but just really focusing on what they're good at. And parents love to hear what their children, whether they're young or they're older, what they're good at. Think about the types of employment possibilities that work for that person before you have a discussion with families. Think yourself about those possibilities, but also think about what you know about the families and what they think will be possibilities that make sense. And think about the benefits for that particular person. And the other part of this is that what we're talking about is not just discussions about employment and not just discussions about volunteer work. We're talking about discussions about very thorough, robust person-centered planning and actions that make that happen, and engaging families in that process. So you'll have other community practice discussions about community-based services and how to create community-based services and what that looks like. When we, as a field, when we first started doing person-centered planning, it was such a new idea to even think about what people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities wanted. And so a lot of the discussions were just finding out and talking to them about what they wanted and listening to them about, or observing them about what they wanted. Now, because of customized employment, we know the value of a discovery process as learning about people, not only for employment, but for all aspects of their lives. So before we even talk about employment, or as we're talking about employment, we really want to engage in a real process of helping people learn more about themselves. And I want to give us a couple of examples of ways in which agencies and staff have used the actual process, the actual programs they already have, to do some of that exposure and planning. There's an agency in in Michigan, and we actually highlight some of their work in the Provider Transformation 2.0 manual, Mid-Michigan Industries. And what they did is, even though they don't have really robust funding, they made sure that every individual had a chance to go out at some point during their week, and a number of points during the week, individually or just with one other person, and explore particular interests that they were interested in, or to expose them to new things. And they created particular staff who were employment champions, who were sort of their guides as they did that. That's one example. Another example is an agency in Pennsylvania that, as they were required to have services that were only 3 or 4 people in the community, they looked for particular places where people could explore. And what came out of that is that there were people who got jobs from places that they were working out in the community, that they were doing volunteer work or other exposures out in the community. So the kinds of programming that we do should provide opportunities to connect people's real interests. And then as we're doing that, we want to be letting families know what we're learning, so that they're getting excited about what we're learning as well. So use that person-centered planning process. And then we want to encourage peer discussion, introducing families to other family members who have family members who are employed in the community, sharing those success stories, starting peer support groups where people who have already begun to work are sharing their excitement with other people in our program. When we're beginning to do employment work, let's start with the people who are most excited about work. I think everybody naturally does that, but it's good to remind ourselves that we don't have to think about the most difficult people to place, and we also don't have to think about the people, maybe we want to wait for the people who are most reluctant and give them an opportunity to see other people's success. So that those opportunities for peer discussion are really important. So what I've just talked about is setting that positive groundwork for employment, and creating that positive vision. And you're doing it for families, but you're also doing it for staff, creating that culture of, we believe in this, and we're doing everything to encourage exposure and opportunity. We are going to have to address concerns. And so this next section is to talk about that. And then just a recap more concretely about the worries that families have. My family member will be unsafe. My family member might be treated badly. What happens if they lose a job? What's going to happen during the hours he's not working? Is he going to be lonely out there? Am I going to lose important benefits? So these are the things that we need to think about how to address. And I think I've made this point a little bit already, but I really want to focus, and this comes a little bit from my background as a lawyer. It's probably the most contribution of my legal profession to my work is the belief that you need to prepare. Every litigator will tell you that if they're really successful, the reason they're successful in the courtroom is not because they're a great speaker, it's because they're preparing. Same thing. If we're going to be successful in doing this work, both the employment work itself and finding really good community placements for people, but also in working with parents, we've got to prepare. We've got to be able to assure people realistically. We have to know what we're promising and make sure we're promising what we can deliver, and we need to be clear and concrete. And that takes preparation. And the other thing is we have to be prepared to have ongoing discussions. This is a picture of Rita. Again, here I was involved as senior leadership. Rita was one of the first people who came into our individualized community-based program. She came there right out of school. She is a very, very protective mother. And for many years, staff would come to us and say, Rita says she wants to work, but her mother won't let her, and she's upset about it, and we're upset about it. And I'd give them, we'd give them advice. Our employment staff would give them advice about talking to the mother. What this took was for me to finally say, wait a minute, Rachel, you need get involved. You're a parent. You can't just sort of, this young woman wants to work. Um, you need to get involved. And so what happened is I didn't, I did it gradually over time. I had a number of phone calls first. Her mother worked way out in Brooklyn, which was far out from our office. She lived way out there. And I didn't have a lot of time. So I started with a couple of phone calls and I said, I'm talking a little bit about employment. We'll talk a little bit now, then we'll have another phone call, and then I'll come out and see you. And that's what we did. And um, in the final meeting, I sat there with her and Rita, and we talked and we talked, and she was sort of saying, okay, I think so. But she said in a really low voice, and I said, Rita really needs to hear you say yes. And she did. And that yes is stuck. And it stuck because we gave it time, but also we gave her an opportunity to talk to people at higher levels in the agency who she trusted. It, although she was very protective, it was very clear that what she did not want to tell us is how concerned she was about the benefits. We gave her assurances that we would be there if there were ever any issues. She believed those assurances, and Rita's now working. So we're going to anticipate those. We're going to anticipate concerns. We don't have to highlight the concerns, but when we're describing what transformation will look like, what the change will be, we want to give people a full picture and make sure that we're as knowledgeable as we can be. And then when the concerns come up, we will address them concretely. Let's talk about some of those in particular. So let's talk first about safety. We want to acknowledge fears about safety, and then when they come up, and part of that is describing the specific support that will ensure safety. And that means that you need to know what they are. So if you don't know what supports are available, answer the kinds of concerns parents will have, the concerns we talked about what happens if I lose the job, what happens if they only have a part-time job, how are they going to get to work? How are they going to be safe getting to work? If you don't know those answers, you're not ready to have the conversation. And that means you need more internal conversations to make sure you understand. And if you're not getting the time of senior leadership or other parts of your program about it, you need to insist that you get their time because you have to be able to paint a good picture. Conversely, if you do know those answers, you're going to feel really empowered to have the conversation, and you're going to feel more excited about having that conversation because you're not going to feel at a loss. So it may be that there's information about how employment people do travel training, that if you're a community-based person or a facility-based person who doesn't know that, you're going to need to find out what that looks like and be able to describe it, or to bring them in to describe it. If you're going to be using customized employment to help people find jobs near their home, you need to be able to explain that to people. If you're going to have benefits people working with people to use impairment-related expense deductions to help people cover transportation, you're going to need to know that. So you want to think about that, and you're going to want to describe what kind of services are going to support people if they lose their job, what people are going to do if they have part-time jobs, all of that. In terms of the workplace, when we're talking about the workplace, and what it will look like for people and people's concerns about fitting in, it's really good to have stories. And if your agency's new at that, you can work with colleagues with this community of practice of people who are ahead of you in the curve to describe really nice relationships between employers and coworkers. One of the roles I often play at JobPath, because my son Alex is working, is I have the most heartwarming stories about the way that his employers and coworkers have really embraced him. We have many stories about that. I am happy to share stories with any of you about the wonderful things that happen in the workplace that provide support and friendship to people. Being out in the community, whether it's work or volunteer work or activities, is the best way to actually make sure that people are safe. One quick story also about Alex. He's part of a community choir, and he's on Facebook. And one day he posted on Facebook that he had gotten one of these, scam requests from somebody out, in some third world country who said that he was his long lost son, and Alex wanted to know what he should do and whether he should help this person out. There were about 12 members of his choir who were also on Facebook who immediately responded and said, Alex, this is a scam. Don't respond. I didn't respond for a while because I was so amused by and interested in all these responses from other people. Finally, I decided that maybe I should respond because otherwise people would think I was a really bad mom. So I responded, and then another 5 members of the choir said, Alex, listen to your mom. There were people at Job Path who responded. So those community connections do keep people safe, and we want to explain that to people. We want to describe what job coaching looks like. So work with each other to do that and to be able to provide assurances to people about what it can look like. Talk to people about customized employment and how people can get the right workplace, even if, like that board member, they're worried about fitting in, finding the right environment where they can fit in. Think about those in terms of the ongoing supports and services and people's concerns about what will happen if people lose jobs. You need to have those internal discussions again about that. Again, if you haven't had those internal discussions, if you don't know what it looks like, you're not ready to have those conversations. You can have those conversations with people who are with individuals, families who are more courageous, but if you know that they're going to have these concerns, you need to do your work internally. You also may need to work with funders to create other opportunities, particularly we don't have as many weekend and evening opportunities for socializing. As people are working, we need those opportunities. So we may need to start working as a community with our government partners to create opportunities for people to continue to socialize with their peers and to find those connections. So finally, I want to talk a little bit about benefits. That's always, the clear elephant in the room. And what I wanted to say about benefits is that the most important thing here is to be a really good resource. You're not going to necessarily be the expert. Your agency may not have the ability to have a benefits counselor. But someone at your agency, and hopefully more than one person, needs to know something about work incentives and how it relates to employment. And it isn't rocket science. And hopefully you can get people at a couple of different levels to know. Because the person who knows, if they're at a different, they may leave. And so you want to have enough basic knowledge. It looks like that slide didn't go through, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the 4 core financial issues for individuals and families as we talk about benefits. And so the first issue is income. And so we're going to talk about income and how that is how that's a core issue. I'm just pulling out the hard copy of the slide. So one is income. The second one related to that is control of income. So it's not just having the income, but being able to know the families and household, the person who's running a household needs to know that income is coming into them. If someone has a paycheck, will they provide the same contribution to the household? The third issue is eligibility for services, being able to keep eligible for important support services, and then eligibility for health benefits. Let's talk about benefits generally. You want to communicate that you take it seriously. You don't want to be dismissive. You want to be listening and learning. One of the things that those of us who do customized employment have started doing is making sure that part of what we're discovering is the benefits and talking to family about what their particular issues are and concerns are about benefits. So if you are doing customized employment or any kind of development of a profile with information about people, make benefits part of that discussion. You want to, again, make everything individualized, and then you want to communicate clearly and factually based on the particular situation. There's some clear messages that we really want to give people as we're talking about that. We want to be clear that the system is set up so that people can work and come out better. So that's like the clear message. We don't have to give every single detail. It doesn't mean we don't want to expose people to those details, but we want to give a basic positive message. We want to communicate that we have partnerships with benefits counselors. We want to communicate more than once, and the conversation will take time. And that's true with all of the issues we've talked about, but benefits are complicated, and so you don't want to start by overwhelming people with too much detail. And then be willing to go the extra yard, to offer to go with people to benefits counselors. You may not always be able to do that, but if you can, that's really helpful. I just, we're going to start talking about just the income issue to begin with. And the basic message here is that the system's been set up so that people receiving benefits can always do better financially if they work. And what I have here is a picture of the Red Book. Many of you may be familiar with it. It's on the Social Security website. The reason I want to focus on it is that in terms of being a good resource, you don't have to go to a full, long course on benefits. I mean, I encourage everybody to do that, but the Red Book is really pretty clear. And if you spend a little time with it, you can get that basic message about people doing better financially through that. So just the basic, just going, and this is not a training that I'm providing. There's no way that in the next, 10 minutes or, that I can do that. But the focus of this is sort of think about what the message is and to be as clear and simple as we can when we're having these initial discussions. You don't want to be so simplistic that you're in any way doing false advertising, in any way allowing people to think something more optimistic or positive than it is. But you want to make sure that you feel confident about this clear message. So for SSI, the basic message is people always do better financially if they work. If they're getting SSI now. And the best way to get that through to people is to show them a simple calculation. And that means you do need to spend a little bit of time with that Red Book, but I guarantee you, if you go and look at that, the calculation's there. I'm going to very quickly mention the calculation here, but again, this isn't a training. When we are trying to figure out how much SSI is going to be reduced, there is a significant discount for work earnings. So it's never a one-to-one deduction as SSI is reduced. There's basically a flat $85 deduction, and then from what's remaining after that, half of that income is deducted from the SSI in terms of figuring out how much SSI people get. When you are presenting this to people, though, you don't have to show them the calculation to begin with. You can really just, and if the formatting of PowerPoint was a little bit different, I would be able to sort of show you exactly what this looks like. But basically, on one side, you want to say, this is what you're getting now. This is what you're going to get if you work. And if you work at a certain, amount of income based on what we think the wage would be for the number of hours. And you can just create a very simple graph. And so what we're showing here is you're making $771. After you work, you're going to make $1,213. And look, this is the difference. Showing people graphically what that looks like, there's nothing like doing it. And it's much better than just saying, don't worry. Um, Clear message about Social Security disability. If you are on SSDI in 2019, you can keep your entire SSDI payment as long as you make under $1,220 a month. It's true. Social Security disability calculations, there are many different phases. You have a trial work period, and then you have your period of 36 months, and then there's another, where you can work at the the substantial gainful employment amount. There's all of these details, but for the purpose of talking to people about employment and what the impact of employment is, you want to give them the first basic method. Then later, when they actually are thinking about working and they're engaged with it, then you can spend time separately or with a benefits counselor going into the details so they really understand how it works and what they need to pay attention to. But the important thing is the basic message and laying it out. Getting back for a second to just going to continue with the income issue. Again, another income issue is the control of income. And so when I realize in discovery that that's part of a family's issue is, well, what happens if my son has his paycheck and he doesn't continue to contribute to the household in the same amount? And what we do in those cases is talk to them about creating a rental agreement, a basic contract about what the contribution is. People will feel relieved by having the issue out there and discussed. So that's the control of income issue. The other issue that is true in Utah, which actually is not true in New York, is that various waivers eligibility is dependent on income, and I'm sure a lot of you know that. So another issue that you want to talk about, again, very individually, you need to know in advance what waiver the individual is enrolled in so that you have the particular concrete information. If you have specific information, if people trust that you're thinking about it, it's going to be reassuring for them. And then the final core area of people's concern that we really want to talk to them about are health benefits. And if they're working, what will happen to their health benefits? And again, there are some basic categories, and it's really helpful to know which category people are in and to talk to them concretely about it. So if people have already been on SSI when they start working, then the Social Security Administration has a 1619B work incentive. That means that as long as they make under $34,000 this year, $34,486 a year in Utah, they get to keep their Medicaid. There's no point in talking to someone who hasn't been on SSI about this. So again, you really want to make sure that you know that you have your information when you're having that discussion. Separately, if someone hasn't been on SSI, they can still take advantage of Utah's Medicaid Work Incentive benefits. And I am not in any way an expert on Utah's Medicaid Work Incentive benefits. I know a lot about what we call Medicaid buy-in in New York, which is a similar program. At the end of the presentation, I have a couple of resources, and one of them is the link for the Medicaid Work Incentives unit, and they are a resource for you. But you want to lay out the very specific information for somebody that this is, to show them what they think they might make with the number of hours they might work, and the kind of premium that will be charged. In many cases, there'll be no premium. In some cases, it's a small premium. And then I would suggest doing the same thing, same kind of chart I showed you that I talked about with SSI, where you actually say, this is how much you're getting, this is how much income you have now, this is how much income you will have minus that premium. People can see, oh yeah, there's a premium, but I'm still coming out a lot better from working. Make it clear. So here, just an example of explaining to people what the countable income would be. based on their monthly unearned income minus $20. And then you add to that the monthly earned income minus $65 divided by 2. So you're really spelling out for them. The individual has 500 in SSDI, they earn 1,000. What will be their countable income? And then going back to your graph and showing them the premium. But you want to do it very individually in a very clear way so they see how it's going to work. So finally, before we stop, I just want to talk about pulling all of this information into thinking about how we're going to talk to people. We've talked about what we want to say, what kind of information we want to provide, but now talking a little bit about the different ways. And we've talked about this a little bit throughout the presentation, but just focusing again on the importance of one-on-one informal discussions. And I would add to that, while we're having that one-on-one informal discussion with families, beginning to have those one-on-one discussions with care managers at the same time. Obviously, letting the family know that you're, or the individual, that you're also having those discussions so that that care manager can be a very robust part of the process. As we're really talking about the direction agencies are going in, as an agency, have those small group sessions with families. We all have heard horror stories about a public forum where, senior leadership is standing up there and just hearing people yell at them. That is not a useful, that's just not a useful way to have people feel supported, or for you to go about having those conversations. But small group sessions with families, making sure that you've got some people who believe in what you're doing there as well in the room, is helpful. Is bring in self-advocates who have experienced employment in group meetings with small groups of individuals so they can get excited by employment. Give family members an opportunity to hear from other family members. And then the last thing is, as we're doing all of our work, we really, and it's so key to community-based services, we want to make sure that we have focus groups to get input and guidance. And I have to say, this is something my agency hasn't done enough either. And I'm very intrigued, and a lot of it is because we just don't find the time to do it. But you're going to have much more engagement from your family community, and ideas, many of them are connected in their communities. You're going to be able to get new ideas from them if you have periodic times for that. And so what I've got here is, there's a WorkLink, an organization in San Francisco. They have periodic wine and cheese nights, which is our opportunity to families and individuals to talk about their concerns, but also to give ideas. And I think thinking about how you're going to have that ongoing communication, not about a particular issue, also about ideas, is really a good way to have a good ongoing relationship where you tap into the energy, the positive energy of the community. Before we stop for discussion and questions, there's a couple of resources. So I mentioned a few times the Provider Transformation Manual that ODEP put together. In that, there's two manuals. So there's a Provider Transfer Manual 1.0 and a 2.0. In particular, there's a chapter on stakeholder engagement by Pat Rogan and Sean Roy, and that will also has a write-up about stakeholder engagement generally, but with a focus in part of it on families and individuals. And then I also promised you a link to the Utah Work Incentives Planning Services. They gave me a little crash course on Medicaid Work Incentives in Utah in particular. And they are really happy to be helpful to you as you're thinking about how to talk with families. So with that, I think it would be great to open up discussion. I think we can open up the mic, right, Krish? So that people can actually talk and give their own ideas and experiences, as well as questions.
Yeah, if people have questions, they can raise their hand, and then we can turn their mic on for them. Just click the raise the hand button up on top of the screen.
And also, if you also have your own experiences or thoughts or ideas to share with people, if you think I'm dead wrong about that, something, tell me.
While folks are kind of formulating their questions, I'll go ahead and get started. Often as I've been working with folks, and we have a school to work project here through the Partnership and Employment Systems Change Grant. And one of the things that we're trying to do is really reach students before they leave school, making sure they have individualized work experiences. And what we're seeing is also right at that school level, as a person's IEP team is coming together, the educator may not understand what's available. Um, the support coordinator has maybe, kind of been part of the team, or there's always just been the discussion that somebody was just going to go to a day program that's only for people with disabilities if they're in DSPD services. And so at the point that we start saying, oh, hey, you need to think about employment, but it's not been considered, we're often met with resistance because it's not been part of the conversation. And we're seeing some change with this project by doing a lot of what you talked about, getting parents together, helping them understand. We're not talking about 40 hours a week for everyone. We want to be thoughtful. But I just, oftentimes what always comes up is, folks that have really complex support needs or have some major kinds of health issues, or, needs a way to be, have their personal care needs met throughout the day, going to the bathroom or changing a brief. Can you kind of speak to maybe some of those challenges that you've worked with, or parents, or
Right.
piece? It always comes up, so I'd love for you to spend a little bit more time on that.
Yeah. I mean, and I go back to, it does come up. And I think that the answer that people need to hear is they need to understand what it's going to look like. And part of that is, and I think I urge you all as a community practice to think about it, because when there's when there are too many silos in funding streams and we can't access them easily, it gets really confusing for families. And so we really have to understand when you can bring a personal care attendant in for work, right? Where you can, how do you deal with the transportation needs? Is that an employment funding issue? Is it a personal care attendant issue? And so we're not going to have those. We only have those answers if we have those answers. When we talk about those issues, and when we often do it through customized employment or through very individualized planning, and the only way to do it is to really step back and say, okay, how are we going to do it in this particular situation? But we've got to have the funding. We have to understand how we can use our funding that's already there flexibly. And there's no point in having the conversation unless you know that information, because then you're going to get people raising the concerns and you're just going to be looking at them.
Thank you.
Very often we can use, habilitation services of different categories to do that work. And that's what we come up, and that's what we do.
Ty, looks like Ty raised his hand. Ty, you can flip your mic. Just make sure the mic's green, and then you can ask your question. Up on the top, we've enabled your mic for you.
Am I on?
Hi, do you have some?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you, I think.
Yeah,
Talk a little louder.
So one issue that I want to have you address is the liability concern of a lot of parents. I've witnessed or experienced a lot of.
I'm losing you.
I'm sorry.
I'm losing you.
Can you not hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear him pretty well.
No.
Ty, I'll kind of speak for you.
Can anyone else?
Ty's question is about the question of liability and the concern there. Keep going, and I'll try to translate for you.
So my experience is that a lot of parents, their kid might have some maladaptive behaviors, and then they're concerned about liability out in the community. What if their child has an outburst? What if their child injure somebody, you know, those concerns regarding liability with their child's behavior. So, you know, I've had a
Hmm.
lot of clients who they are great at the job they do, but then the behavioral issues come into play and dealing with that with liability.
Okay. Yeah, let me address that a little bit. I don't hear it so much in terms of liability, but I do hear it. I'm getting an echo now. I do hear it in terms of people's concern about it happening and the impact on people's self-esteem. Regardless of which it is, I think that we have to acknowledge what behavioral issues there are. And for those individuals, we need to talk with families about how employment or volunteer work or any of those issues needs to be done in a customized way for those individuals. I don't think we should ignore the issue, whether it's a liability issue or not. I don't, the chances of there being personal liability is not that great unless they're a guardian specifically. But regardless of that, we don't want it to happen. And so there really is a legitimate issue that needs to be done in a customized way. And that customized employment, one of the conditions is one, a work environment that isn't going to be triggering those outbursts or those behaviors, or is less likely to, but also having the kind of support that people need. And that again is, if we don't have the support available in those situations yet, that person may not be able to be in that environment yet. So one, we can find environments that work, and second, we need to think about support. Um, and that's regardless of the liability issue. From a legal point of view, there's only certain situations where there's going to be liability, and you may want to explain that to people. But I think the bigger issue is just, we don't want to put people in situations where they could hurt other people or themselves, and that requires customizing.
Thank you.
Other questions, ideas? Would it be helpful for me to talk? Do people know enough about customized employment, or would it be helpful for me to talk a little bit
I
about
think we
how
could. I
that
mean,
would
we've
work?
certainly invested in customized employment, and the School to Work project is focused on using a customized approach for folks who, really have multiple barriers to getting to work. I do think it would be helpful if you would maybe talk
Right.
about, right, because I know New York is also has employment first initiatives, right? Not employment only. So maybe folks who have been reticent and you've kind of gone through those education opportunities and looked for things, and then maybe they've still said, no, that's not something I'm interested in. But having a community-based program, how have you been able to kind of use those day services or the existing kind of dollars that somebody has to maybe build some experiences or confidence? How you've kind of structured that or worked with a team to still kind of try to help somebody have a life that's more included, even if they're not wanting to focus on work right away. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah. And I think I spoke a little bit about the experience of people in Michigan who are using their communities-based, their skill building program that was facility based, is now getting people out in the community in groups of 3 or 4, but using that to really focus on people's particular interests and abilities. One of the things that it's really important to do is to individualize as much as possible. When we move people out of facilities, we don't want to just be recreating the programs and out in the community where people are doing what's easy for us to put together. And I know that means time, but if even if we're working in groups of 3 or 4, think about mixing and matching different groups of people so that they can really explore interests and have staff involved in reaching out to the community to find options that relate to people's interests. When we do that, whether they're working or not, they're going to get exposed to new opportunities. And as we're doing that, um, if we're also being in touch with families about those successes and giving people themselves kudos for those successes, they're going to start thinking about the next step for them. If there are people who, for behavioral reasons, we haven't been able to find the right match for them, it's a good way to make sure that they're doing something exciting and interesting that is expanding their horizons. One of the really nice stories that I explained a little bit about in Pennsylvania was this: they had a group of 3 or 4 people, and they thought about people's interests, and they were working in a horticultural center. And 2 or 3 of them just basically enjoyed it. One person was taken under the wing of staff at horticultural center because they saw that he was really, really interested and was really capable. And they really focused on giving him new skills, and eventually that turned into a job. Whether it turns into a job or not, if we're building new skills for people and we're tapping into their interests, it's really great. And we do that. My agency has a 1-to-1 program, but there are agencies around the country with community-based services where they're really trying to match it with people's interests. And when we do that, we're going to be moving people forward. And it's really exciting. The same Pennsylvania agency that I just spoke about, they also had a group of seniors. They did something like really great. So they took this group of 3 or 4 senior citizens, and instead of them spending time in the facility, they started spending 2 or 3 days a week at a local senior center. And the matches that came out of that were amazing. First of all, one person got a boyfriend, so that was really nice. Another group of people, there was a woman who at the senior center who began to take them on the bus to evening events that the senior center was holding, and making sure that they got where they needed to go. So for whatever group of people we're working with, if we're mindful and we're thoughtful about how we're working between those services, then we're going to expand people's lives, regardless of whether they have a job yet or whether they are going to have a job.
That's really helpful. Looks like
It's very exciting and it's great. It's like, again, I'm a real advocate for employment, and I love it when people get jobs, but we've seen so many situations where people are moving forward in their lives. We have a college support program, just how Alex got his college degree, for people with autism spectrum disabilities. And there are a lot of Think College programs for people with intellectual disabilities. And that's also a nice gradual way to expose people to possibilities. And a lot of those Think College programs on campuses are also helping people explore work opportunities and internships. So there's so many wonderful ways that we open avenues of exploration for people.
Thank you. It looked like there were some folks typing maybe a few more questions, but I wanted, you mentioned that Job Path also supported people in living situations. So with residential services, could just kind of speak to how you have incorporated some of those integration goals and inclusion goals, whether they be employment or, community life engagement with your residential services, and how you've worked with folks around that?
Yeah. So I want to say that We do, and one of the things that we've done with our residential program, first of all, in our residential program, people are only living with 2 or 3 other people with disabilities, and in some cases, we've actually had them have live-in roommates um, from the community who can help integrate them. And so in some of those situations, we'll have live-in roommates who will be sharing their interests and combined interests and, going to concerts and, meeting, in one case, they went on a boat ride in the city that had music and they were talking to people in the community. We have people in our residential programs who are going to music programs together, tour them together to a music program. We have a young woman who is who is visually impaired, and we found a program for people without intellectual disabilities who had visual impairment that was a theater program that she became part of. So a lot of it is, again, kind of motivating your staff and orienting your staff, thinking about the community activities that are local to people, and realizing that it's not just bowling, right? And it's not just going to the park on weekends, that you really want to kind of think about what the resources are that people in the community are using. So I think we have a comment here. I can read it. Marcella says a lot of the parents have no clue that VR is a resource for them and their child. It's also informing them on these resources that will give them the assurance of the different services that they provide to help their child be successful. So being well informed with VR will be a great way to help parents with their concerns. And I think that's a really good comment. And I'm glad you added that. I think, and VR is not just it's not just employment services that you say. There are training opportunities. There are paid work experiences in some cases. There are educational programs that they support. So I think that's just a really, really good point. I think we have someone else typing.
Anybody else have any questions or comments for Rachel?
I just want to, the other thing I would say is I think the most difficult thing when we run programs is resources. I get it. And so I think that there will be, sometimes it's not creating, and very often it's not creating a full-time position. It's finding the staff who are particularly interested in exploring resources or particularly interested in benefits, sort of make a portion of their job, free up a portion of their time to be able to focus on some of these issues so that you have the answers. Someone who's really interested in planning might be someone you give a little bit of time to think about those funding sources so that before you talk to the families transitioning from school, that you have the answers that you want and that you need. Just, don't think about this. Sometimes we don't think about this in a large scale. We have to think of it as, okay, how can we make a little bit of time for someone to start working on these issues?
I think that's been great. Okay, we're close to the coming up on 11:30. I'm glad that we set up enough time to make sure we had time for questions. And Rachel, I really appreciate the information that you shared. I really think it was helpful to really kind of think through the parent perspective and where they've come from in terms of the education system and being in charge and, and just creating that perspective. And then also that the perspective you have as a provider, I think it's really valuable. We did record this webinar. So if you want to share this with folks in your agency, please let me know. We'll send out the link, and I'm assuming that Utah State will have it on their link of recorded webinars or archived webinars. And I can't think of anything else. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. It was
Please
a
fill out
pleasure
the survey.
to spend some time with you.
ODEP really likes it when they get feedback on the resources that they provided states. So if you'll take a minute to fill that out, I really appreciate it. Thank you.